Wow. Greetings, everyone. This is the first call of People-Centered Internet for 2024. It's January 14th. I'm delighted to have you with us. Our special guest is Vint Cerf. And Vint, we're delighted to have you with us. I'm going to bring Mei-Lin Feng in first. You're both co-founders of PCI. And Mei-Lin, we're delighted that you're with us to talk about all the great things that are happening in PCI. So with that, Mei-Lin, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you for your great leadership of this important gathering that you have kept up so well. And also I want to thank Lynn Wells, who is the board member who's responsible working with you. Well, Happy New Year, everyone. We have made it a tradition for Vint to come and join us at the beginning of each year, and we're very grateful to him for making the time this year. We're coming soon in the next year and a half into the first decade of the people-centered internet, and we're very, very conscious of the honor and responsibility of being a not-for-profit that is co-founded with Vint, and that he has personally served as inaugural chairman. The list is illustrious. I think it's just the Internet Society and us. I don't know whether that's true, Vint, but that's what I think it is. Internet Society, you founded and served as first chair, and People-Centered Internet, you founded and served as first chair. I want to mention other internet organizations that Vint has helped to found and served in leadership positions, because we come at a pivotal time for the internet. These are the organizations are ICANN, the Internet Governance Forum, the NRENs, the National Research and Education Networks. And more recently, Vint has been very active with the Marconi Society. And all of these we're glad to be working with in many ways. At PCI, we're very proud to be the catalyst for the 50th anniversary of the internet. I'm just going to share screen. Recently, in September, we co-chaired the digital regulation topic at the UN Science Summit. And under that series of sessions, we brought in Bob Kahn and Vint Cerf, together with Dima Al-Khatib from the UN Office of South-South Cooperation. I feel that it was a historic time because 50 years of the internet have brought us to the point where many, many people in many countries can now think about what is the next 50 years of the internet. And we had this also showing that it's not just a public sector thing or an academic thing, but this session was shown at the MasterCard Center for Inclusive Growth, or sponsored by the MasterCard Center for Inclusive Growth. And it was at the MasterCard headquarters in New York City. And then on the top right, you'll see a feature of how we like to do things at PCI, which is gatherings of people reflecting that the internet we want should be fueled by friendship. And that is one of the biggest inspirations that I take from having worked with Vint over the last over 10 years, that friendship is critical, and his own kindness and personal generosity will always stay in my mind as an intrinsic feature of the internet we want. And then today, I wanted to note that we, the People-Centered Internet, support Safer Internet Day, which will be on February 6, 2024. And we hope that the rest of you will also help to get the word out about this. And with that, I want to now bring in Yasha Stein, who is our executive chair of the People-Centered Internet. Yasha, would you like to say a few words?
Yes, thank you, Mei-Lin. I'm on my way to Davos, in the middle of the highway, kind of, and on the parking lot for sure. So I'm sorry for not being on video, because the internet connection is here in Switzerland not very well. We have to work on that. We have prepared for the campaign a video, and this video our pro bono partner agency, Saatchi, has created. And we had an interesting conversation. I working on the video with Vint that really impressed me how important for Vint is, one, to be very correct on the history, which for sure is important for all of us, but two, that not only this part, but his fellows and colleagues working on the internet are seen too. And that impresses me. And I want to say here, Vint, I really appreciate working with you. And I would like to ask you if you share a little bit of your perspective. We have been working on the video. Saatchi created a version of the video which was not correct, and we had to work on. And I would like you to share your thoughts a little bit on that and how you perceived the work with on the video from your perspective of the history, and before we show the video just in a bit.
Just realized I got muted.
There you go.
I'm talking to myself, which is not uncommon. So first of all, I really appreciated Yasha's willingness to work on that video and to revise it in order to be more accurate, precisely accurate. An example, for instance, is that the ARPANET and the internet are not the same thing. At the first, exchanges between two computers on the ARPANET was really just logging in. It wasn't like a message was being sent or anything, very deep. In fact, it was just typing in login. So it was important to me that that we put things in proper perspective. What is super important to me is that the predecessor system, the ARPANET system, broke new territory, demonstrated that packet switching was feasible, demonstrated that it was useful for computer communication, demonstrated that computers of different brands with different operating systems, different technical word sizes could be made to interwork across a packet switch network. The next big step, of course, and the one that we're celebrating, is the step into multi-network networking over many different media. And the thing which I think is the most dramatic about the internet's evolution is that it has managed to scale by a factor of 10 million over the course of its operation over the past 40 years. That's not a common capability. And I put into the chat, although maybe not everyone will have seen it, because if you joined after I put it up, you might not see it. But there was a lecture given by one of our senior executives at Google, Amin Vadat, a year ago on January 12th. And he was laying out the story of computing and communications and the challenges that lie ahead. And he clearly lays out the fact that we need a 1000x improvement over the next decade in order to satisfy what we now believe will be computing and communication requirements during that time frame. And a large amount of that of the driver for that increase is exactly artificial intelligence, machine learning, large language models, inferencing, and things of that kind. And I think that all of us on this call can recognize that we are clearly entering a new era in which computing has become truly ubiquitous and truly something we are all depending upon. Mark Weiser, who sadly passed away early, was at Xerox Palo Alto Research Center and invented the term ubiquitous computing. And I think we are living what he was thinking 30 or 40 years ago, where not a moment goes by when we aren't dependent on some piece of software executing successfully, correctly, and timely in order for us to make our days work well. And I think for all of us, we should be simultaneously excited and terrified by that dependency, particularly on our mobiles, for example. So that's my preamble to this video, because the video is highlighting why we are celebrating, but why we're also saying we better get our act together. The operative word here is together, in order to not only survive the next decade or two, or perhaps even the next 5 decades, but also thrive. And that is the challenge that we see before us. So I'll stop there. I hope that wasn't too long a preamble, but I appreciated
Thank
very
you,
much
Vint.
the opportunity to respond.
Cannot introduce the video better, and
Can you see it all?
I can see it.
Okay, good. Here we go.
In 1969, humanity has just taken its first pioneering step towards a more connected world. Two computers of the predecessor to the internet have been directly linked for the first time. 5 years later, in 1974, Vint Cerf and Bob Kahn shared an architecture and philosophy to support open design for the sharing of information. The idea of internet was born. Today, 5 billion people are connected. AI can build whole new worlds, but leaves some of us behind. We've shared the knowledge of the stars, but allowed dangerous lies. We're preserving our heritage and celebrating human culture. But will we let our individuality slip away? Where will AI and the internet be in the next 50 years? Without you, the future of the internet and AI is lost. We need all of us to make the internet and AI more people-centered. Let's shape our future together.
so I think we had an audio problem here. The music was not transported, and the voice was a little technical, artificial, as Pablo said. So we will share the link of the video. For some reason, it was not transported correctly. The content, I think, was visible,
Yes.
so we may. So content is correct, Vint?
Well, it's Vint. You know, I thought it was great not to have the music in the background because it made it easier to hear what the dialogue was. So I wasn't complaining at all.
Good. All right. So we I hope you hear me well. I don't have lags, but so the internet again in Switzerland, but I think we can open a short discussion on that if you have any questions or Skip, sorry for the artificial voice. That's one piece which should not happen. We have different versions of this video with different audio mixes. That might be an early version here, but there is definitely music integrated. So, but in terms of the content we have chosen, does it resonate with you, or is it something you would like to add or change? This is something we can discuss shortly here if Kevin is fine with that, and Millen, we can give it a space a bit, or we can for sure after the meeting ask you for giving feedback so we can improve it, because this campaign video will be central for our work for the 50th anniversary campaign as well as the Without You campaign. We drive not just this year, but the next couple of years to bring everyone in and that participate, not just on the internet and information, but as well as on artificial intelligence and in general participating on value adding. Melin, do you want to take over? Because I think my internet connection is not very stable. Thank you.
I really just want to say I would like to turn this over to Vint.
Well, I'm happy to pick up the traces. First of all, let me draw attention to Doug's comment, which is of real substance. If you're looking in the chat, please have a look at that. And Doug, I wonder, given that intervention, whether you wanted to amplify that before I make a few opening remarks as well.
Well, just my comment, you talked about this communication speed, and as being with Motorola and Nokia for 33 years, that's where we focus on how to amplify humanity. And, if you look at, the amplification is over 2 trillion times amplification of speed. What we used to communicate by words, we now with computers can transmit 1 trillion times faster. And so this ability to amplify human ability is incredible, and only just beginning.
So let's just take that point for a moment and ask ourselves about our own ability to ingest content, because it's not clear that we have been able to ingest it any faster now than we could 400,000 years ago. So that's a problem in a way that we need to ask ourselves. If our technology is confronting us with the ability to deliver content to us at these horrendous speeds and scales, but our brains can't absorb it, then how do we augment our brains to do that? And although I think I'm wandering off on a little side alley here relative to what I wanted to bring up at the beginning, I have this feeling that the computers have to become our friends in helping us digest all this stuff. And some of you have probably heard these wonderful jokes about the large language models helping us compose our email and also helping us to read our email. And so what we're starting to imagine now is that you have a bot assistant and you enter a little bit of text and it generates this florid email, which goes to the recipient, who hands that to a bot, which digests it back down to a small number of substantive sentences. And after a while, the bots will just talk to each other and we'll go off and do something else. That's a very peculiar world to anticipate. Well, let me shift gears here and say that if we're going to celebrate 50 years of internet, we don't want to look back for very long. We need to look forward. We need to ask ourselves, what are the challenges that lie ahead? And I think some of them are pretty obvious right now. I would argue that we have created an environment where amplification is readily available to everyone. We are increasingly making it possible for people to generate content, and I mean this in the most general sense, whether it's audio or video or imagery or text and what have you. We're giving people these tools that allow them to take their ideas and amplify them and generate content to be shared and distributed. But the thing is that we've created this global bulletin board, and anyone who wants to can pretty much put anything they want to up on this gigantic bulletin board. And now we're discovering that there are some things that we wish people would not put up on the bulletin board. And of course, that view will vary from culture to culture, country to country. And so we have this variation in what's acceptable and what isn't. And so I think we're seeing, certainly I'm seeing, countries and national administrations and regimes observing this and saying, we need to do something to manage, control, and hold accountable parties who are sharing information in this global system. Of course, the view about what's acceptable and what isn't is not uniform. And that is leading to questions about whose rules apply and how are they applied, and how do I identify parties? And so accountability is becoming a very important part of this environment, whereas in the past, I don't think it was nearly as critical. The anonymity of the internet was considered a benefit. and you didn't have to be known in order to share your ideas. And there are a number of conditions under which that kind of anonymity is attractive. But I think we're discovering now that anonymity is not our friend entirely, because people will share information because they're anonymous that can be harmful, misleading, and deliberately composed for those purposes. So I am believing that this next set of decades will demand accountability of parties, whether it's a person or an organization or a country, for their behavior and use of the internet and its computational capacity. So that's the accountability side. I don't think that anonymity will go away, but I think that it will be, let me use the word managed. So people often will use the whistleblower example to say anonymity is important to protect the whistleblower. What we can see from history is that often people will go to the press in order to make something known that they think should be known, but they don't want to be known as having provided that information. Reporters, in some cases, have even gone to jail for refusing to identify their sources. They know the sources because that's how they can validate whether the source is believable, but they are protecting that source. And so that's a kind of anonymity that I think will persist. But the absolute anonymity of the internet, I think, is probably not going to be in our best interest in the long term. Now, there's a flip side of this, and it has to do with agency. And I'm sorry if many of you heard me say this before, but it's not a bad stump speech. I think that everyone who is online should have agency to protect themselves. So what does that mean? Well, there's some obvious ones, things like strong authentication, passwords, and two-factor authentication, and so on. What you want is to be able to identify yourself in such a strong way that no one else can pretend to be you, because it's pretending to be you that causes a lot of trouble, especially if it's identity theft effectively. And so we want to prevent that. And so strong authentication is our friend. There's a tangential element to that, and it has to do with whether or not the information that we are encountering online has any integrity at all. And I'll use the word integrity here in multiple ways. One of them has to do with whether the data has somehow been altered. Is this a modified deep fake or something like that? Sometimes digital signatures can help us with that. If a source material has been altered, but the digital signature doesn't match and can't be regenerated, then that's helpful to you. That means that you can tell that something has been altered, and that you could reach the appropriate conclusion that maybe you should be suspicious of the message that it's delivering. So once again, cryptography can be our friend. And digital signatures can help with integrity. The other angle on integrity, of course, is provenance. Where did it come from? Who is the source, or what is the source? Should I trust that source? And for what reasons should I trust that source? And again, digital signatures can sometimes be helpful here. Ironically, just because something is identified as the source doesn't necessarily mean you should believe it. In fact, in some ways, I'll use a political example here, and I hope I don't offend anyone, but the fact that it comes from Trump, it's helpful to know that it comes from Trump. That doesn't mean you should believe anything that he says. So, but it's good to know where it came from, because that gives you a clue that maybe you shouldn't believe what that party is saying. So strong authentication does not necessarily mean validation. It just means that we have some sense of provenance. At the Internet Governance Forum, which I hope many of you participate in, or the national or regional versions of it, there is a great deal of attention being paid right now to managing abuse on the internet, whether it's denial of service attacks, or misinformation and disinformation, or malware being distributed, or ransomware, or all the other ills that we're all familiar with. There's a great deal of concern that we establish international agreements in order to cope with the accountability question. And one of the things that I'm sure most of you know about is the so-called Global Digital Compact, which is in the process of being constructed. that's an attempt to lay out some notions for how countries could cooperate with each other in order to help to create a safer and more useful internet environment. And I was glad to see that Mei-Lin drew attention to the Safer Internet Day on February 6th. And I think I sent a note about that out to the PCI distribution list earlier this morning as well. So I think we are, as a community, faced with simultaneously a desire to capitalize on what we have learned about the power of computing and communication. And at the same time, we're challenged to figure out how we can make this a safer and more secure environment so that parties will feel comfortable using these technologies. If they don't feel comfortable, if they don't feel they can trust the environment, they won't use it. That will have all kinds of disadvantages, some of which is loss of convenience, some of which is significant change in economic conditions, because this environment, this online environment, is becoming a very critical part of many economies around the world, and it will increase over time if people can trust the system that they're using. I'm a little concerned about the governments that look at the harmful things that happen on the net and want to criminalize it. And the reason that I'm so concerned about that is that criminalization is a fairly severe step. And we all, I'm sure, know that in the history, there have been many convictions that have turned out to be wrong. And so criminalizing things has a huge penalty. It could be financial, it could be incarceration, among other things. And if we get that wrong, and if we institute a sort of blanket criminalization of all kinds of behaviors, we are, I think, potentially harming a lot of innocent people. So somehow we need to think our way through how to do that properly in a way that preserves justice. And that, I think, is one of our primary objectives. To come back to misinformation and disinformation and these sort of deep fakes and things like that, I hear a lot of concern about artificial intelligence and large language models and their utility in producing these sorts of things. And so then we see a bunch of regulatory targets of artificial intelligence. I think this is a mistake. And the reason it's a mistake is there are two reasons for this. The first one is that I don't think we understand these tools and their misbehavior well enough yet to even put rules together to say, if you do these rules, this will make it safer. I'm not saying that there is not a problem. I'm only saying that I think we're focused too quickly on regulation before we actually understand how these things work. Just to draw a distinction between the European and the US practices, my sense of the European Union is that there might be a problem we should regulate. In the American view, it's sort of, there is a problem, we have encountered a problem, we should regulate. And so the EU typically starts regulating before the Americans do. We could argue which of those two is the right thing to do. But my big concern is that we're so overly focused right now on artificial intelligence and machine learning and large language models, we fail to recognize that some of those abuses can occur using other tools that have nothing to do with AI. To give you a trivial example of this, Photoshop can be used to create fake output. In fact, photographers use it all the time in order to produce, improve their output. And the entertainment industry, of course, goes way out of its way to create what looks like real things, but they are all special effects. And we enjoy that. That's entertainment. The problem that we get into, however, is that as we use these same technologies in different applications, we now increase the risk factors. So as an example, in the case of artificial intelligence, if you imagine sort of a layering of risk, at the lowest level of risk is entertainment. I've used chatbots to write little short stories, and I found them very entertaining. Some of you know about the one that I asked it to write a story about an alien that got into my wine cellar and was consuming my Cabernet Sauvignon. And it told the story about an alien, a Martian that got into my wine cellar. It didn't explain how he got in there, but it explained how I discovered him, and eventually we got it all sorted out. So that's a very innocuous kind of thing. I'm setting aside the intellectual property arguments, however, where somebody says, wait a minute, you took my face from my 1935 movie and you created a 2035 movie, but I'm not getting compensated, and that's not fair. Where there's going to be a lot of debate about that sort of thing. But let me set that aside. Just the entertainment side is the low risk kind of application. But now let's go up to the higher risk application like medical diagnosis, medical treatment, and financial advice. If you're going to offer to someone a service at that level using chatbots or using other large language models or some combination of AI, you are putting the consumer of that at very high risk, partly because we know that these systems can get things wrong. We know that they hallucinate, they conflate facts to produce counterfactual output. So that's a high risk application. And I think it would be reasonable for us to look at regulation in the context of risk. And to say, if you're going to offer high risk services, then you better demonstrate how you have managed to mitigate that risk so that the general population is not harmed. And if you fail to protect the general population, there should be consequences. So I'm going to just add one other thing, and then I would very much like to get into a dialogue with everyone who is joining on the call, because I have the feeling that your perspectives and views and ideas are more important than mine. But I will say that the one thing I feel very strongly about right now is that people who are taking advantage of the internet to try to offer products and services that benefit us all should be given reasonable latitude to do that. And so I'm asking myself and all of us, how do we create a regulatory regime which simultaneously encourages the exploration of new ideas and applications, but at the same time also creates an environment where parties are held accountable and we feel safer in this environment than perhaps we do today. One thing I will say is that we as users have a certain responsibility ourselves. You've heard the term critical thinking before. I would suggest to you that the online environment demands critical thinking of us. Where did this information come from? Are the claims corroborated by any other legitimate source? How can I identify sources that I can trust? Those are all questions that we should be asking ourselves as we make use of these online environments. So I reached the belief, I won't say conclusion, that maybe we should have an internet driver's license. Because if you think a little bit about what we insist on before teenagers get the keys to the car, is that they take a class that tells them about, first of all, what are the rules? Second, what are the risks? Third, what assumptions should you make when you're driving? And the best assumption you can make is everyone else is a bad driver except you. And so you should anticipate, inappropriate behavior in all the other drivers, and you should plan for that, prepare for that, and be ready for it. Well, the same argument can be made for the internet. And so I would love to have classes where we teach people what the risk factors are, how you mitigate them, make them pass a test. I'm not sure that you have to issue a license or show your license to the internet police. I'm not arguing for that at all. But I do like the idea of people being trained to recognize what the online risk factors are and how you mitigate them. So I think I'm not going to rattle on forever here. I want to stop and ask Maylin and others whether you'd like to engage in further discussion on this general question of how do we make the internet a better and safer place. That's what the video is telling us we need to do, and it's telling us we need to do it together. So help me out here. What else should we be doing to fulfill the challenge that video makes?
Hey, Lynn, do you want to jump in for a moment before I go to other people that I've been tracking in the chat?
Yes.
The chat's going crazy, and I haven't
Yeah, it's
been
going crazy in a good way.
So what we should be doing is having conversations like this, of course. And I want to turn it over to Kevin to moderate it.
All right, very good. So I just want to remind everyone that the way we did, if you've got your camera on, I know you're ready to engage. And, so I've been tracking those of you who are on. First person that has camera on that was top of the list is Frank. So Frank, join us. I'll remind you, one question, because we've got a big stack, and we'll go from there. Hi, Frank.
Well, howdy, Kevin, everyone, Vint. I'll be very brief. I've been following Vint for 50 years with this vision that I could be independent and have freedom to do my own thing. Ended up running a skunk works that Vint knows about. Count him as a friend, though we've not spent a lot of time together, except through PCI. And the answer to the question is, how do we do this together when the internet really creates a lot of individuals such as myself, Lone Eagle Consulting? I don't depend on anybody, but I am a self-directed learner. In 1867, the first transatlantic cable was run to Europe, connecting all of humankind to the same instant of progress. And it was attacked by sharks within 2 weeks, and they had to redo the 2,500-mile link.
Wow.
Now, 100 years later, in the 60s, when I was in Mountain View, Vint and others were literally 100 years later continuing with that same vision, connecting all of humankind to the same instant of progress. And I was on board, but the technology wasn't ready. So now here I am 50 years later, retired, independent, having been to Alaskan villages, Aboriginal villages, Hawaiian villages, as my rural, remote, and indigenous emphasis has led me on wonderful adventures. And I learn by doing, not by making money. And I have 40 years consecutive online teaching under my belt. And what we teach now is vastly different than when I came online in 1982. And the Big Sky Telegraph was to connect rural, remote, and indigenous so they could teach me what's going to be the heart, what are the solutions going to be for these most difficult populations to reach. In 2017, Trump convinced me that the federal government wasn't up to the task. My having spent decades working with leaders in philanthropy and government who didn't know what being online was, being in capital letters. And so now we've got iPhones, I've got a MacBook, we've got earpods, but we're still individuals, and the theme of PCI is bringing people together, which from my low-end skunk works was my theme as well.
Right.
And so here we are, we're finally on the same page, Vint, top down and bottom up. And I don't have all the answers, but I'm pretty good at coming up with a lot of questions. So this is too important a forum for me to try to dominate. But let me just say, this is what I've learned from PCI. The time is shorter than ever. The positive possibilities are greater than ever. And the risks of even climate are now rapidly upon us. And so the pace quickens for us to figure out not just the infrastructure, that's pretty well in hand, but how do we come together as one human family across cultures? I can go to heygen.com, create a digital twin with 2 30-second audio and video inputs, and then have my digital twin digest my hundreds of essays over 4 decades and let me go fishing while my digital twin takes over teaching online classes. Gary Bowles has 1 million e-learners on LinkedIn. I emulate to have something like that before I die, being a youthful 71.
Frank,
And
are you going to get to a question for us? Are you getting
Do
to
I have a question?
for Vint?
What's the best way to bring people together effectively on an ongoing basis would be my question. And yes, definitely tell me to sit down because this is my topic and I'm in my 5th decade of this. So but I also wanted to say that Vint's morality and intent to benefit all of humanity is to be lauded and emulated by all citizens on this planet. So in my mind, that's his greatest contribution, is a common sense, fair way of looking at the potential of all of us, the power of all of us. Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks, Frank.
Well, thank you, Frank. Kevin, if you don't mind a tiny response. First of all,
Sure, absolutely.
the big sky telegraph was such a wonderful phenomenon so early on. I mean, you recognize the need for access in the rural parts of the country, and we're still struggling with that, as you well know, with even the $42 billion that's being spent by NTIA is still as uncertain as to its effect. But the one thing I will say is that even with all of the physical access to the system and the computing devices and the like, knowing how to use it effectively is still a big challenge. And so we have to have that go in parallel with the literal physical accessibility. We have to have understanding of how to make use of these technologies. So let's go on to other questions, but thanks so much for that intervention, Frank, and all your work over these years.
Yeah. Thanks,
Thank
Frank,
you all
for joining
the
us.
time.
Yeah, Greg, really appreciate it. Okay, let me see. Like I said, I'm looking for a camera launch. Suzanne Sincavage, your camera is on, and I'm going to ask you to please join us.
Oh, thank you very much, Kevin. Vint, thank you so much for conducting this webinar. It's such a pleasure to see you again. And this is really important. And I would embrace the next Zoom or a meeting that we have to talk about this area, about licensing, certification of identification, identity, and responsibility for the internet. I completely agree. Also too, please, I want to thank Malin from the bottom of my heart for the co-authoring with the G7 abstract. I hope this works out great. Myself, Candace Carter, and Trevor Muhlfelder are embarking on our next book. And we are, our focus area is in biology, of course, biological authentication with biometrics. And my question to you then is, do you see this playing a much greater role in the future for authentication and the security of digital transformation of biological markers? I would love your comment on that.
So thank you very much for asking that question, Suzanne, because that's a topic which I've been wrestling with for quite a while. I have some discomfort with the biometrics, and I'll try to explain why that should arise. The first one is that the biometrics may or may not be persistent. And there are a number of situations anomalous situations where a formerly reliable biometric might have changed. I mean, some people's fingerprints change, not that their shape changes, but their detectability changes. Iris scans could be a problem. Physical damage can occur. Facial recognition doesn't always work. Small anecdote, I'm on the global entry program for travelers to and from the United States. And there was a period of time when you showed up and the system was supposed to take your picture. And over a dozen different machines, I got there is no face shown error message. The system said, I don't have a face. And so I ended up, of course, going to the kiosk to one of the agents and saying, the system says I don't have a face. So how do I get back into the country? So the reason I worry about this is twofold. That one thing is anomalies in the biometrics over time, or even temporarily, where facial recognition doesn't work because you've been harmed or damaged or injured or something. But then there's one other problem. If your biometric has been compromised and you can't change your fingerprints, then what? The thing that was useful was the fact that you carry your finger with you all the time, unless you lose your finger, which would be sad. But if it doesn't work anymore for some reason, now you can't change your fingerprints to improve matters. So there's another example. Are you familiar with what's called skimming in the credit card world?
Yes.
So imagine for just a moment that there is an ability to bypass the normal detector of the fingerprint and feed the system with the digitized version of the fingerprint that it's supposed to be detecting. And so you can pretend to be someone else by feeding the digital summary of the fingerprint. So now when somebody says, well, I'm sorry, your fingerprint has been compromised. I can't change my fingerprint, so now I'm stuck. So I'm very much in favor of additional other factors besides biometrics. And one of the examples of that is two-factor authentication using things like YubiKeys. Or let's see if I can show this. You can see this tiny, tiny little thing that plugs into my USB. That generates a cryptographic password. I have that and nobody else has it. I register that. If I lose it, it's not clear anybody will know what to do with it because they won't know, who it belongs to. And so I'm a big fan of augmenting any kind of biometric with something like that because it's replaceable, it can be re-registered. So I'm sorry, that's a really long answer to your question, but I am, as I say, concerned that we become overly dependent on pure biometrics for identification.
Correct.
Thanks for that question.
I agree with you. I agree with you. It's going to be a challenge. We're going to have to add in other authenticators and merge those together for proposed future research. So thank you for that answer.
Yeah. So there is one other possibility, of course, that's DNA. And that, of course, is the ultimate identifier because everyone's DNA is different, but they're not different by very much. That's right. What's so astonishing. You've heard the story that human DNA is different from a chimpanzee by 1.2% or something like that. So I would not look forward to having to go to the ATM at the bank thing and stick my finger in and have a blood draw in order to get my DNA to identify me. I think I would probably, that won't go over too well, I think, with the general public.
That's true. And for the G7, and Malin can chime in too, the entitlement of that paper is involving DNA and securing DNA in transport. So
yeah,
awesome.
Thanks, Suzanne.
Thank you.
Appreciate you being with us. And I'm going to ask, let's see, Candace, how are you?
She's my partner.
Hi.
Hi.
Good. Hi.
Glad to have you with us. You have a question or you made a comment in chat, I think kind of relates to what we were just discussing. Would you like to jump in?
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say, along with the fingerprint, voice print is something very easily and hackable. And that's probably, for me, I feel like one of the scariest compromisable areas coming up because right now, Vanguard, your voice is your password. And with Verizon, your voice is your password. And it's something that, your gyroscope picks up from your iPhone. So very easily, to mimic and then make big financial decisions for someone without knowing it.
Candace, this is such a good point. And I think that what we're seeing is this funny struggle between convenience. I mean, I don't have to remember to bring my finger with me. I don't have to remember to bring my voice, or I don't have to remember to bring my eye scan. I do have to remember to bring my YubiKey. And so people are saying, but it's so much easier to just, show your picture and your phone opens up. I tend not to use those technologies for all the reasons that I was describing. I much rather, actually take the time to enter in some kind of a long password. So I really appreciate your point about the ease with which these can be falsified. But we can see what the desire is to make it easy. And so
Yeah.
we need to think harder and harder about how to overcome the barrier of strong authentication. Because if it's too hard to use, people won't use it, they won't get the benefit. So how do we make it easy and at the same time secure and also resistant to the kinds of attacks that we've just been alluding to?
Yeah. Very true.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Now, I think Pablo had some comments in chat, and I wanted to see if I can draw him out. All right, because he's not on camera. There he is. I drew him out.
Buenos dias, Pablo.
Buenos días, señor Vint. Which comment of mine, Kevin, did you want to
Well, I'm just
Of the many.
you know, you can jump into the thread we were just discussing, or you can take it in a different direction. It is Pablo's dealer's choice.
Okay, well, since we were talking about authentication, I'll point out we used to have this fascinating branch of computer science called formal methods.
Hmm.
Where we would try to define in mathematical terms certain security primitives, and then prove that software had those characteristics we wanted. And I just wanted to point out that the only security primitive that we've never had a math model for is authentication.
Interesting.
And I don't know if there's still ongoing work. I've not read any formal methods papers on security primitives in a while, but that goes to what we were just talking about with the using biometrics or using multi-factor authentication. The other thing I'll point out is, and this is where I'll tie in a little bit of the disinformation, misinformation, and authentication, is in financial markets, because of some cybersecurity issues with the way the back-end systems work for large transactions, we've gone to a voice authentication for large money movements. And in the last 2 years, we've had at least 3 cases I'm aware of where several hundred millions of dollars were stolen because somebody used a deep fake of a voice of a CEO.
Wow.
And so we're rapidly going to approach a point where at a distance, we're going to have to authenticate people, and voice and video are not going to be enough. And as Vint pointed out, biometrics are not going to be enough, and passwords aren't going to be enough. And so it's going to have to be a combination of these things. The other thing I'll point out is that what all of these things have in common is none of them are actually stored in the computer. Representations of all of these things are stored in the computer, typically as mathematical hashes, but finally, from a computer point of view, it's just a hash. What the hash represents doesn't matter as long as you can get the hash to match.
Yes. Very good
Right.
point.
All right, thanks, Pablo. Appreciate you being with us, my friend. I'm going to have Maylinda jump back in. Maylin,
Sure.
there you are.
I want to bring life and death. There was life and death in the physical world, but there's new kinds of life and death that are going to happen in the digital world. And I don't think we've begun to deal with this. And I would love to hear, Vint, what you think, whether or not philosophy departments, psychology departments, should they be thinking about what does death on the internet mean? And it's a really serious thing, right? You get somebody's Facebook thing and they actually pass away and all that stuff is still there. And then you think they're still alive. At least sometimes I don't know. Are they dead? Are they alive? What's going on? And it is very challenging. And as we are getting older, this is going to happen to us. So your thoughts, Vint?
Okay, so this is quite an interesting topic. First of all, I have this plan. I'm sure all of you know about the phenomenon called flame mail. And so my plan right now is to, when I pass away, to have a chatbot that will generate flame mail in my absence. And this gives new definition to the term eternal flame. So that's my plan anyway. Now there are several definitions of birth and death in the online environment, or interpretations, and so I'm going to pick a few of them because they have different consequences. So your point about knowing whether somebody is still alive or not, or still viable, given that these accounts persist. At Google, we have instituted a mechanism that you can sign up for that basically says, if we've not heard from you after a certain, not logged in for a certain amount of time, which is set by the consumer, we will execute on whatever you tell us to do, which might be terminate the account, flush everything, turn the account over to another party, notify somebody. I mean, there are a series of things that you can ask for based on a presumption that you're no longer around. So we try to deal with that case. There are legacy, I think that's the right word, something like that, accounts where it is known that the party is no longer around, but they deliberately left the material up. Some people, to come back to a comment that was made earlier in this call, some people are deliberately trying to build bots that assimilate all of the stuff that they have talked about, maybe including their videos and audios and text and so on, for purposes of generating a simulacrum of that person, so that children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren and maybe the general public can have this sort of interaction. Of course, the potential of spurious interaction would worry me a great deal. I wouldn't want it to be thought that my legacy, Vint Cerf, had an opinion which I don't have and didn't have, but the bot produced, 50 years from now. There is, however, another birth and death item that you implied, maybe not even deliberately, and that has to do with when your account goes away unexpectedly. What if you're still around and your account is no longer accessible? You've lost access to the account, someone has seized the account, for whatever reason you can't get access to it. There are incredible side effects of that, cascade failure effects that are really damaging. And I see this all the time because people know what my email address is. And when they run into problems like that, at Google anyway, I get an email saying, help, help, I can't get access to my account. Sometimes those are people who are trying to get access to the account inappropriately. They're pretending that they are the person saying, I forgot my password. And so, of course, at Google, we go a little nuts trying to distinguish between a legitimate help, help, I lost my password, and an illegitimate, hi, I'm trying to break into somebody's account. But the idea that the death of your account while you're still alive may have all kinds of serious side effects. So we have to figure out how to deal with that too. And so I'm glad you brought it up, because the idea of preserving the account may turn out to be important. Last point on this topic, you've all heard me talk about digital preservation. My big worry is an awful lot of content that we would like to preserve is going to get lost because it's encoded in a form that we don't remember anymore, or can't run the software that knows how to represent it. And so digital preservation may also be a part of your life and death on the internet scenario. And it would be really quite interesting if this group decided to try to compose thoughts about life and death on the internet in these various dimensions, just to reflect on what the challenges might be and whether we should be taking steps to cope with some of the bad side effects.
That's great. Vint, it reminds me of the conversation we were having several years ago. You referred to as digital vellum, right?
Yes.
That
yes.
we needed to have a digital vellum come into existence because there's a lot of digital knowledge getting lost because the original means of production and being able to retrieve it, all right? I remember when I got onto the space shuttle simulator, it was on an old IBM 360 computer, right? And it was like, this is the last one where that's actually an operation here at NASA, right? Because it has a very specific purpose, right? And once we shut it down, I don't think anybody's ever going to be able to retrieve that. And so the thing is, can that go to the Smithsonian? Can it go to the Library of Congress? Can we preserve some of the machines, so that we can read it? It's really, your thesis is brilliant. It's acting on it.
So I can tell you that digital vellum is not dead, and
Yay!
there is work going on with some other colleagues, not only inside of Google but largely outside, trying to figure out whether we can institute a set of practices and standards that that would allow preservation of digital content ad infinitum. So we hope that that we'll have something concrete to say about that soon.
I'm looking forward to hearing it. As you know, I have a deep interest in that. Now we're at the bottom of the hour where we, this is the end of our regular time, right? We go into overtime at this point for half an hour. Are you able to stay with us, Vint?
I'm good for the other half.
Outstanding. That's great. So we're in overtime now. For those of you who have to drop off because you have other obligations, you have our gratitude for being with us for our first call of the year with Vint Cerf. And I am going to, the first person I'm calling on in overtime is Ted Wallach. Ted, you're on camera. Please join us. You've made several comments in chat.
Thank you, Kevin. Vint, it's a pleasure to meet you. There's a lot of conversation about content and policing content, and I don't hear a lot of conversation about policing what algorithms are optimizing for. And I'm specifically speaking to Meta, and I'm specifically speaking to Frances Haugen and what she came to let us know about. And it's been really troubling for me to see that she could come out with that information and for us to sort of not do very much about it. I'm wondering what your thoughts are about that.
So this is a really interesting question, and thank you for bringing it up, Ted. One thing that I wish that our companies that are in this space, not just Meta, but all of us, including YouTube, would have done and did not do would be to hire anthropologists, sociologists, and neuroscientists, psychiatrists, and so on, to help us understand what the side effects are of some of the algorithms that are being used. Some of them were aimed at maximizing ad revenue by having more people stay online and see more ads. And, that's not an unreasonable thing to do. What I think was not clear is that these algorithms had other side effects. The persistence had side effects that were socially unacceptable, or at least not helpful, not constructive. And I think I can't speak for any companies, and here I'm not trying to speak for Google either. I would just want to speak for myself. This notion of responsible products and services, you hear about responsible AI. Well, responsible software is software that should work reliably and not do harmful things. And it feels to me like we ought to introduce memes into our society that say those are important things that you should get credit for. Incidentally, there's a tangential aspect of this has to do with strong authentication. It would be interesting if we could introduce a meme in our societies that say that if you strongly authenticate yourself before you express your opinions, that you should get credit for that. And that people who insist on anonymity should get diminished credit because they're not standing behind what they have to say. And I won't go through the whistleblower thing again, but it would be an interesting thing for us to talk about as a group. What memes, what norms we think should be part of our online cultures on a global basis. What kinds of things could we all choose to adopt that would deal exactly with the kinds of things that you're talking about? This often, if we can't rely on someone being responsible, then we tell them, if you are irresponsible, according to this rubric, there will be consequences. And of course, we have to make those consequences real. And that's what regulation is all about. And an unenforceable regulation is useless. And a regulation which has undesirable side effects and inhibiting side effects that keep us from doing useful things, those are also not very useful. But I think you're quite right. I would like to see a lot more attention paid to the sociological evaluation of the way in which many of these algorithms work and a deeper understanding of how to avoid their bad side effects.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, greatly appreciate you joining us, Ted. That's outstanding. So I'm going to, I want to see whether, Vin, you noticed at the beginning of the call that we had a classroom with us. Let me just see if the classroom is still here. I don't see them. All right, they may have had to drop off at the bottom of the hour. All right,
I hope that was just a matter of time as opposed to, boy, this is boring.
No, it's not boring. It's not boring, right? No, you still have lots of people who are here. I'm looking at James Shank. All right, can you hear me? You've done a lot of posting in here, James, and I want to see if you want to join us.
And
sure. Let me get to my office where I can turn on the video. But
well, you can just talk to us.
yeah, so I think there's been a lot of concepts that have been brought up, and it's covered a lot of space already. I guess for myself, one of the problems that I foresee becoming more prominent than it is today is that the concept of identity or identity validation is it's based on right now it's based on the exchange of some digital hash or fingerprint, as we've already discussed. But in essence, the incentives for innovating to find ways around identity validation methods and authentication methods are all on the criminal side, right? And the criminals, as already mentioned, have had a lot of success at hitting large targets and almost staying ahead of the state of innovation of attempts to properly authenticate and properly identify the user behind the authentication event. My question, pulling this all together, is because of the misalignment of incentives, is there any future state that you see where identity validation will beat the rate of innovation that the criminal underground of the criminal underground?
Wow. I'm not sure that I'm going to have a very concrete and well thought out answer to that. I will say that almost any technology that we might choose to use, any practice that we might choose to use, is replicable by the criminal underground. And so none of this is ever going to be perfect. However, I've been thinking more and more about how inconvenient it is to establish these strong authentications. For example, in the case of the YubiKey, and by the way, I'm not picking on them. It's a good example of a piece of physical gear. If I had to have 100 of those for 100 different accounts, that would be really awful. If I had one thing with multiple keys in it, that would be helpful, especially if the system automatically selected the correct key to do the handshake. I imagine for just a moment how hard it is to maintain accounts in many different services. And I probably have at least 300 or so accounts. Some are old and probably not used, and some are still very active. And I have to stash away in an encrypted file all the passwords because I can't remember them all. It would be really interesting if we had a better way of updating information on all those various accounts that we have. And there are lots and lots of things, the last password, and there are a bunch of other services along these lines. But here's the scenario. It's a little bit hazy, but I'm imagining for a minute there's a bunch of information that might be needed by various and sundry services that you subscribe to, and that you can make an update in one place with the kinds of information, what's your address, what's your phone number, what's your mobile, and so on. And that information is propagated on demand to the various accounts that you maintain, that you subscribe to. But the question is, how do I make sure that only the account that I subscribe to gets access to this thing, and not somebody else who shouldn't have access to all that personal information? So I'm imagining that there might be some way of presenting a token or offering a token to each of the accounts, a distinguishable token that it can use in order to authenticate itself to the service that's updating your personal information. And that particular mechanism would have to be live, in the sense that you wouldn't want to be able to present the same token every time, because if somebody gets a copy of that token and presents it, they would get access to the information that service would get, and you wouldn't want that to happen. So it'd have to be some sort of an exchange that establishes a liveness. I hope that's making a little bit of sense. But I'm looking for ways of making this whole authentication question a lot simpler to do, and a lot easier to do, and a lot easier to maintain than it is today. Because until we get to the point where it's both easy and secure, we're going to have lapses that are, damaging.
Yeah. Thanks for that question, and thanks for that response. I'm going to ask Francis West to join us. Francis, good to see you. Glad to have you with us. Your question for Vint.
You too.
Hi, Vint. How are you? Happy New Year. Sorry, I came on a little late, so I only caught on the question that Mei-Ling asked about the death and life. And you commented about how responsible AI and should become more of a social topic. Right now, the World Economic Forum is going on at Davos, and of course, last year there was a consortium of AI consortium of trusted AI. So it would be interested to hear your perspective as to, how impactful this kind of consortium can be, and should this be a way of really not just influencing, but educating, government agencies on this, rapidly, life-changing technology area. Just, your view of how the business consortium like this can play, or maybe cannot play. Maybe it's just really as people joked about, Davos is just, a place to be, right? It's the all the super wealth and super power congregate at Davos, but it doesn't really, in the end, it doesn't actually mean anything to average citizens.
Well, it might mean something to average citizens, because the side effects of those who do attend Davos often come away and decide to do things that might make quite a difference, both good and bad. So we shouldn't ignore Davos by any means. I would actually want to take a moment to say that Frances has had a huge and long influence on accessibility. She was at IBM for years, and that's a topic we didn't talk about today. But just to put a small marker in, making the internet accessible for everyone is super important in my book. So accessibility for people who are blind or have motor problems or hearing problems like I do should be a very high priority. It's hard to do. It's not an easy thing to do. It's hard to do. So somewhere along the line, we ought to be including that in our agenda for the next 50 years of internet. Coming back though to what Francis is talking about, I think that let me talk about young people for just a second, which is almost everybody relative to my age. They often will go to YouTube instead of Google search or Bing or something to get an answer to a question. And so the first question I asked is, well, why do they do that? And the answer is because somebody has probably done a video to show them how to do something. And so they go to there and they say, how do I do X? And they get instant training or learning about how to do this particular obscure thing. And somebody asked a question about what surprised me the most about the internet. What surprised me the most is that people are willing to spend time putting videos together to tell you how to do X for some obscure X. But the reason that's so important is that you're getting the information just when you needed it, so you can apply it. It's amazing how much that sticks when you learn something that you needed to know right now in order to get something done. So the reason now I'm telling you this is I'm wondering whether we could figure out how to get people who go to Davos to get access to answers to questions like, how do I do X? Where X might be, how do I regulate this? Or, you know, what steps should I be taking in order to make the network safer and more secure? I just wonder whether we should be thinking in the back of our minds, how do we provide a cache of content that answers those kinds of questions? Where do I go to find out X? I'm not quite sure that that's actionable, but in the back of my mind, I would like to have a place for people to go who are well-intended, want very much to do the right thing, don't know where to go to get advice. When I was chairman of ICANN, we used to get countries coming saying, please help us organize our internet policy. And I would say, well, you know, we have this little narrow slice of responsibility, but we don't know, you know, how to tell you everything. Sometimes we sent them to the Internet Society because they had a broader scope in some sense than ICANN. But anything we can do as a community to help policymakers get answers to those kinds of questions would be a good thing. It's very tempting to say those stupid legislators don't know what they're talking about, so they're passing stupid laws and blah, blah, blah. That's not going to get us very far if we show up and say, hi, you're stupid. So the better thing is to say, hi, we have a bunch of answers to questions that you might have, and here's how you get to them. I see Mei Lin has her hand up.
I just want to reinforce what you're saying and some of what we're doing with the IEEE for 50th anniversary of the internet is addressing this specific problem, which is there are technical professionals in every country. And yet very often nobody asks them. And I remember talking to one of the professors in Tunisia who was the world expert on IoT. And he said that the World Bank had brought in a third-tier expert, flew them in first class from New York to Tunisia. And he didn't say this, but it was like, that person wasn't even qualified to lick his boots. And he was in Tunisia already, understood the local conditions.
Yeah.
And we have this issue that there is local knowledge and local expert everywhere. So that's part of what we're working with the IEEE to do, is to get that expertise identified. And with an organization like IEEE, you have the kind of reputation system and validation, peer-to-peer review that could actually help organizations like the World Bank or local governments understand how credible is this person. I'd love to hear you say a few more things because I could really use it for the IEEE.
Can I just make one quick comment? I think I absolutely agree in your comment. I think a lot of times the policymaker, they don't know what they don't know, right? So we have to meet them where they are. And I look at this PCI group, and there's so much talent, but as you know, accessibility has been a long haul. And one thing I learned is that our narratives, our communication strategy, is really not working very well in elevating and or connecting at the right level with the C-suite or the decision makers. So we can take this offline. Maybe we can, instead of just having knowledge, but figure out what the channel of communicating, our to the influencers in this case could be a very interesting project for all of us. Anyway, back to you.
All right. So, Mei Lin, are you finished with that thread of thought?
Yeah.
All right. Very good. Just wanted to check. All right. So we are coming up to the top of the hour, and Vint, one of the questions that was posed by multiple people, right? Doug Hulin, David Bray before he left for Davos, some of the students, right, in the classroom down at Emory. The general gist of it is this: looking back, what surprised you the most about the first 50 years of the internet? And looking forward, what do you hope will surprise us all 50 years from now?
So the two things that have surprised me the most, and I think are well, maybe three, are first of all that that it scaled up to where it is today. Now, in order for that to have happened, of course, a lot of changes and adaptations have happened. New technology has been invented, optical fiber running at 400 gigabits a second, all that stuff has happened. And the system, the basic architecture has managed to accommodate that. That's pretty amazing. Second thing that I already mentioned is the fact that people seem to be so willing to share what they knew with other people, regardless of any compensation for that, other than the satisfaction that what they knew was useful to someone else. This is sort of an indicator of the goodness of humankind, despite all the other bad things that we see happening. The third thing is that the business model actually has worked, and it's not the business, it's that it works at all as a business. I think that's maybe the part that is the most astonishing. I'm imagining my 80-year-old self whispering in the ear of my, let's see, what would I be, 30-year-old self in 1973. Hi, listen, let me tell you how this is all going to come out. In the end, you're going to have 80,000 networks all running concurrently and are all interconnected in various ways. The people who run them will have different business models. Some of them will be for-profit, some are nonprofit, some are government run, blah, blah, blah. They'll decide who they interconnect with and on what grounds. And oh, by the way, most of the agreements will not even have written contracts. It will just be a handshake. And so I'm imagining telling my 30-year-old self that that's how the internet is going to succeed. And I'm sure that I would have said, what have you been smoking? Or I realize you're now 80 years old. Obviously, you've lost your mind because it couldn't possibly work that way. And the fact that it does is quite astonishing. And the fact that it continues to evolve is equally astonishing. It was intended to be flexible. It was intended that you could add new layers of the architecture, just like Tim Berners-Lee did with HTTP, or new protocols within a layer, like the QUIC protocol, which is adjacent to TCP/IP, but it runs over UDP and does similar things, and instead does some of them better than TCP/IP did. So those are all pretty amazing. And the last thing, of course, has been the thing I've been working on for the last 25 years. That's the interplanetary extension, which has required us to go invent a whole new suite of protocols, thanks to the metric space that deep space imposes on us, and the speed of light restrictions that Dr. Einstein has imposed on us, has made for yet another interesting odyssey. The fact that it's not over is really exciting. The fact that we can legitimately talk about the next 50 years, I'm sure it will evolve into something that I can't imagine right now. But the fact is that we've unleashed a demand for this kind of capacity, this ability to work together, to find information, to collaborate. And that demand will continue, I think, as time goes on, especially as the problems we face get harder and harder. So global warming has been mentioned once, as far as I know, in the call, maybe more than once in the chat, which I haven't been following. But that indeed is the primary challenge that we all have. How are we going to survive? It was suggested by David Rubenstein yesterday in a speech, an interview, that we are using the wrong term to characterize this. We say global warming and nobody pays enough attention to that. If instead we said human extinction, we might get more attention, because that's where we're headed.
Yeah. So I have a closing question that came in from Brian Castro at Emory, and I thought this is a good question to close on. Given how the internet has been integrated into the lives of most developed countries, at what point will internet access become a discussion of human rights? The world is becoming increasingly reliant on having internet access, and I can see one day becoming a human rights discussion.
It already has. In fact, I have been dinged for my response. There was a New York Times op-ed that said, access to the internet is a human right. And I wrote back and said, no, it isn't. And I got royally dinged for that. And I tried to explain that I didn't think that we should elevate this particular technology and access to a human right at the same level as housing and clothing and food and so on. But it was pointed out to me that we have made it become so central to the way in which the world works that in its absence, our rights are denied, our ability to function is denied. And in that context, access to the internet has become a human right. And even though I still feel a little funny about picking a particular technology, and my analogy in my response in the op-ed that I got dinged for was, listen, in the 1800s, having a horse was really important. You know, you couldn't really have a living if you didn't have a horse. You had no transportation, couldn't pull the plow, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, today we would not say that having a horse is a human right. Most of us have 275 of them in the garage right now, and they produce a different kind of pollution than the other horses did. So the notion of what our rights should be, I believe, has changed over time. But in spite of my resistance, I think it's fair to say that we become so dependent on these technologies that we cannot reasonably deny them to people because of the disability it imposes upon them for functioning in our modern society.
Vint, that is a perfect place to conclude our discussion today. Thank you for being with us. And on behalf of PCI, thanks for co-founding this organization, right? Because we've had a lot of good discussion. You're not always here, right? I'm just telling you, you have catalyzed a lot of rich conversations, worthwhile discussions, and we're grateful for you. And Maylin, thank you for helping bring this into existence. Do you have any closing comments, Maylin, before we conclude today?
Yes, of course. Gratitude. Gratitude to each of you, and most of all, gratitude to Vint. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone, for being with us.
Kevin, hang on to the chat because the questions are super. They didn't all get asked, but can we get those somehow?
You bet. I'm hitting the little button that says save chat right now. Right.
Good. That's good because
I will send it to you.
Oh, well, yeah, let's do that. We should broadly share those questions because I want everybody to think about them, not just me.
Understood. Well, that is something I'll help. Snyder Alfonso will help with. And I wanted to thank you for the thanks at the beginning. Let me just recognize our committee. The people who do this work are Lynn Wells, Casey Komlosky, Ben, all right. I'm losing Ben's last name. Ben Kaczynski, yeah, down at Emory, and Schneider Alfonso, right? So you have our great thanks to that committee, right? Because they bring a lot of the talent to the table in our meetings every other week. So, and I'll remind everyone, this is actually one of the last calls we're gonna have on Sunday because we're moving to Tuesdays, right? So we'll get more participation on Tuesdays. And thanks for everything that you do, Vint. Maylin, thanks for what you and Yasha do. Cheers.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.